Tyler Herro signed a 4-year, $130 million contract with the Miami Heat last season. Very good season for him. He was one of the best sixth men in the league, consistent scoring off the bench for the Miami Heat, even though he basically played a majority of their minutes. That's exactly what this team kind of needs, because when you kind of look at the construction of the Heat, they do need guys that could come off and score like Tyler Herro has been able to do, and certainly guys that have been able to do it from range. That was kind of their key to victory last year. Analyzing their offseason a little bit more, though, Kyle, what do you think of this Miami Heat team? Do you think they're still contenders in the Eastern Conference heading into the 2022-2023 season?
Yeah, Miami's in this really interesting place where obviously they were the 1 seed last year. They were within one game of the finals, and they almost got there.
One shot, basically.
See, I say one game like that because they had no business winning that game 7. Boston just threw up on themselves in the last 4 minutes of that game, and that would have been the storyline otherwise. But you're right. Yeah, they came within one shot of the NBA Finals, where if they had made the NBA Finals, I attest they would have been the worst team in the history of modern basketball to make the NBA Finals, at least let's say in my lifetime. The worst team to make the finals. They would have been swept out immediately by the Warriors.
There was that Nets team in the early 2000s that made it.
See, technically my lifetime, I was 1 year old or 2 years old at that point. So technically that squeezes in, but let's say the last 15 years, it would have been the worst team to make the NBA
LeBron
Finals.
James led Cleveland Cavaliers that first run.
I guess that's the cutoff point, right?
Okay. That's where
Miami would have been
cut off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Miami would have been swept out immediately by the Warriors, and if they had won one game, it would have been because the Warriors shot 2 for 30 from 3. So what's interesting is that they're in this top 2 or 3 space, but they didn't change the foundation of their roster very much. So I guess what they're betting on is the rest of the teams aren't getting better as well, because Miami obviously subtracts PJ Tucker from the team. There's not really a player you point to where you say their development is going to be this great improvement for them. It's Jimmy Butler, it's Bam Adebayo, it's Tyler Herro, and all of them are, while Tyler Herro is not a fully formed player, they're betting on similar levels of production.
I would also say one of their other big extensions, or not big extensions, but a big move for them, Victor Oladipo, they brought him back on a 2-year deal. You're hoping that he continues to put that injury behind him in his past. He hasn't looked obviously like quite the same player pre-injury. I know in that Boston series in particular, anytime Oladipo came off the bench, he was consistent scoring threat for them, caused a lot of problems. He still has some athleticism, but you are right that they are a flawed team. It's weird that they were the number 1 seed last year when you consider that they were middle of the pack in scoring. They're middle of the pack in rebounding. Actually, they were not even middle of the pack in rebounding. They were one of the worst teams in the league in terms of rebounding. Their biggest strengths were they were the best 3-point shooting team in the league. Didn't take a lot of attempts, but they were the best 3-point shooting team in the league, and they forced a lot of turnovers. And I think this kind of plays into, as cliche as it is to say, Heat culture. Because what Heat culture really is to me is it's that kind of scrappy level of defense, that hustle plays. And you look at their team leader, Jimmy Butler, that kind of exemplifies throughout their roster, because on defense, there's no denying that they are a tenacious defense. They get in guys in the building too that are undrafted or looked lowly upon, a Strus or something, and turn them into players that are key parts of their rotation. Coming into this year, you look around the Eastern Conference though, and you ask yourselves, where do they kind of slot in? Okay, so you have the Celtics that they came within, again, a shot of beating. The Celtics added Brogdon this year. Gallinari got hurt before the season, and then we obviously know what's going on with Ime Udoka. The Bucks just kind of stayed pat. They didn't really make any notable moves. Their biggest move is this postseason. They'll have Chris Middleton, assumedly, in their lineup.
They'll get healthy. The Bucks will get healthy at least.
You think, you would say, but it's always possible too that they suffer injuries, because they've kind of had a little bit of that. It just poor luck that Chris Middleton got hurt when he did. The Hawks got better. The 76ers with Harden coming in better shape, you would think that they kind of got better if they can get a better version of James Harden, because the last couple seasons, the version of James Harden we saw wasn't what we were expecting.
They did Nets also take PJ Tucker from the Miami Heat this offseason.
They did do that. So addition by subtraction, subtracting from your other opponent's roster and adding to yours. So respect that strategy. The Brooklyn Nets, they're the biggest question mark of the Eastern Conference, right? Because last year, told you a dozen times going in, they were not better than the Boston Celtics. And sure enough, they get swept out. They're the only team last postseason to get swept out but they did get an addition in the sense that assumingly Ben Simmons is going to be back on their team. What version of Ben Simmons are they getting? Now you look at all those, and those are going to be really what the Heat are going to be kind of competing with. Is culture, is the 3-point shooting, is the defense just going to be enough to keep them in that mix, to keep them viable amongst that group? I would say they're still within that top 5. I don't see enough to like pull them out of that top 5. I think that Jimmy Butler, he's streaky, but when he's on his streak, he's one of the best players in the NBA. There's no doubt about it to me. Tyler Herro, you mentioned you don't think he's a fully formed player. The player that we saw last year, if that player maintains, that's still a very good player that they have on their roster. And then you're just really hoping that you could get any kind of rebound performance from Kyle Lowry, because Kyle Lowry in the postseason was just non-existent for them and starting to look like a bad contract. If Kyle Lowry can fix that, hell, talk about guys that need to get back into the gym, right? Do some work. Kyle Lowry, if he could fix that and come into camp in better shape, I think that that would be a huge addition for this Miami Heat team.
Yeah, Miami's in that interesting place where they kind of have 2 untradeable contracts, being Kyle Lowry and Duncan Robinson. So obviously they're kind of like fighting from behind in that sense because those contracts are difficult.
With Duncan, he just needs to be more consistent. That's the thing. He's not a helpful player on defense, but if he could just become a more consistent 3-point shooter, because he kind of lost his shot towards the tail end of the last season, and that was one of the big things that kind of made him expendable.
So this is the interesting thing about Heat culture. And I think the Miami Heat and the old time San Antonio Spurs and also the Warriors now, but we need a larger sample size there. What's interesting is that they can find a dozen Duncan Robinsons. And that's the great competitive advantage that they have. But when the playoffs rolled around last year, Gabe Vincent was starting in place of Duncan Robinson, and Max Strus was sliding in for Kyle Lowry. And those guys were making a combined, I believe, $3 million total last year. This year, Caleb Martin is going to be replacing PJ Tucker. They didn't really add any piece for money. They just slid in Caleb Martin to the starting lineup. So they can find those guys. The problem for them where they get in trouble is when they get a little high on their own supply and they sign James Johnson to an extension. They sign Hassan Whiteside. They sign Dion Waiters. They sign Duncan Robinson. And all of a sudden the production dips because Max Strus is basically giving them what Duncan Robinson used to be. Because in Duncan Robinson's first 3 seasons, I think he made a combined total like $5 million. And then he got $80 million on a contract that probably should have been another team paying for Duncan Robinson, because Miami doesn't need him at $16 million. I'll also point out the thing about Oladipo. Shout out to Amin El Hassan, who does Sirius XM radio, and he's on the Lebitard, who pointed out Victor Oladipo, according to his words, was unplayable in the playoffs last year because, yes, he can score points. He is an abomination of a defensive player at this point in his career. And the offensive production you're getting, it's very ball heavy. That's not how the Miami Heat want to run their offense. It defeats the whole purpose of having him on the floor in the first place. So
that's why he's coming off the bench. They're not going to be rolling Oladipo out, even if he does come out in full strength in their starting lineup, and they shouldn't. Like Lebitard saying, he is bad for them defensively. But if you just get some quick spark off the bench, that's what Oladipo excels at doing for them.
Yeah, the thing is, once the rotation gets smaller, they would actually prefer to play Gabe Vincent instead of him, which of course we think of Oladipo as this former all-star number 2 pick in the draft. Gabe Vincent actually provides them more of what they're looking for. And the other part that I think is a big question mark coming into the year is Bam Adebayo kind of disappears every now and again offensively. He has games where it's not that he's not effective on offense. He's just not shooting at all. He's not taking shots. He's not using big man moves. And that's obviously something that we'll have to wait till the playoffs to solve, but it's just an interesting point.
And problems aren't going away is that Adebayo, like relative to other NBA centers, problems aren't going away is that he's undersized. And that's why that they were one of the worst rebounding teams in the league. You go into the Celtics series. Again, the Celtics, like you said, almost threw up on themselves. They gave that series away. But in the games that they were running at full strength and blowing out the Heat, it was because they were able to exploit that matchup with Robert Williams and other pieces on their team like Al Horford or Grant Williams. Other bigger guys in the paint that were able to match up really well with Adebayo. Like you said, make it impossible for him to want to take shots. So those are just issues that I don't know if they can really fix. Adebayo just is what he is, and he's just going to give you what he gives you. And I think that he's a very good player. But you're right. Consistency could probably be the biggest strength of improvement for Adebayo as the Heat try and compete for the NBA title. All right, guys, what do you think about this year's version of the Miami Heat with the Tyler Herro extension? Do you think that they'll be competing once again? Do you think they'll be in that mix of that top 4 teams in the Eastern Conference? Let us know below in the comments section. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on social media, and stay safe, happy, and healthy. We'll see you in the next one.